Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. On this program, a look at immigration policy from several perspectives. We'll talk to California Attorney General Xavier Becerra about how he plans to help roughly 200,000 undocumented young people facing possible deportation. We'll also hear from one of those young people known as dreamers who may have to return to a country he has never known. And a look at the life of civil rights leader Dolores Huerta. She fought alongside Cesar Chavez, and now her own story is getting its limelight. But first, an Obama-era immigration policy is being threatened by the Trump administration. On Tuesday, Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced the end of Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, also known as DACA. The program has allowed young people brought into the country illegally as children to avoid deportation by giving them renewable visas for work and school. President Trump said Congress has 6 months to come up with a legislative solution for the undocumented immigrants, often called dreamers. And joining me now from the nation's capital is Republican Congressman Jeff Denham from California Central Valley. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
It's good to be with you again.
You're one of 10 House Republicans who wrote a letter to House Speaker Paul Ryan urging Congress to protect the dreamers. Why do you think the protection should stay in place?
Not only should it stay in place, but we've got to provide certainty. We actually need a long-term plan for our dreamers. We need to make sure that our dreamers are safe and secure. 95% of dreamers that have come forward and signed up for DACA are either working or in school. And to throw their lives into shambles to create this uncertainty, I think is unfair for them, who stepped up, passed background checks, and have now paid $495 to be part of the system and really show that they're Americans.
We have an intractable Congress right now. What legislative solutions do you think you can realistically advance and get passed?
Well, I think there have been a number of pieces of legislation that have been moved forward, that have been drafted, that are bipartisan. The Senate has the Bridge Act, which is bipartisan. In the House, we've got the RAC Act, the DREAM Act, My Enlist Act. And my bill, the Enlist Act, has the highest number of co-authors, bipartisan, of any immigration bill in the House, and one of the highest in all of Congress.
And your Enlist Act, which basically says that if they sign up for military service, they can get citizenship, right?
Yes, but which is only one aspect of the solution for dreamers. But it is the ultimate patriotic effort to this country.
There have been various versions of the DREAM Act over the years, over the last 16 years, and Nancy Pelosi now thinks, or she says she thinks, that President Trump might sign it after meeting with him on Wednesday. Now, the DREAM Act is a way to offer young immigrants, including those like DACA recipients, a path to permanent legal status, eventually citizenship. Is that something that you would support?
Absolutely. Support it. I have always supported it. And it is actually part of each one of those bills that I named. We've got to push it forward.
And do you think it will advance and be passed this time around? It's failed numerous times before, even with bipartisan support.
You know, I believe that, especially with the president's announcement, that not only is all of Congress paying attention to it, but it's something that we've worked very hard on for the last 4 years. It is time to move this forward. We've got to create the certainty, and we need to do it and put it in law versus doing it as an executive order. So we've got to fix it. I'd like to see it as a standalone bill and show that the two houses can work together in a bipartisan fashion. But if we have to put it on a must-pass bill, a funding bill, or another reauthorization bill of something else, I am happy to do that as well. The main point of this is we have to find a solution, and we've got to do it quickly.
Given that about 1 in 4 dreamers resides in California, do you think this is an issue that the California delegation can and should take the lead on?
I do. I certainly believe that our delegation should take the lead on this. But this is a national issue, and it should be something that every member in every state is focused on as well. And for me, this is a personal issue. We've got to get it done.
It's a personal issue, meaning what?
Meaning that I've worked with a lot of dreamers in my district, and you know, I'm for comprehensive top-to-bottom immigration reform. We've got to solve all aspects of our broken immigration system, but it starts right here with the dreamers, and they're the ones that we've seen this uncertainty, and they've stepped up and want to be Americans. We need to make sure that can happen. And
your immigration views seem to have changed over the years. For example, in 2008, as a California state senator, you voted against a bill that would have allowed undocumented immigrants brought to the U.S. a chance for college scholarships. Your views have seemed to change over the years. You now support protecting Dreamers. Can you talk about what led you to that evolution?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's so much of an evolution as a difference between being in the state legislature versus being at the federal level. This is something that's got to be solved by Congress. It is a federal obligation. And while it's a big, important issue in my district, it's a big issue for California. This is a national issue that all states should be involved in.
Just one day after threatening to end DACA, President Trump seemed eager to cut a deal, in effect maybe combining beefed up border security with extended protections for DACA in the hopes of satisfying all sides. Is that an idea that you would support?
It is, absolutely. And if you look at the legislation from last year, the Gang of Eight bill that came out of the Senate, very bipartisan. I was one of the first co-authors of that in the House. But again, that had not only a solution for Dreamers, but it had border security. Neither one of these issues should be partisan issues. They're issues that are American issues, and both houses need to work together on.
You know, the president has surprised us continually, sometimes changing his mind on issues. For example, even on DACA this week, he tweeted out that DACA recipients have nothing to worry about. What does this mean for other issues that are on the Republican agenda? Do you feel like you can count on his consistent, continual support, or will he continue to change his mind on things?
I think it depends on the House and certainly on all of Congress. We've got to put things on his desk. We need to actually get these bills, these big reform issues, to his desk and allow him the ability to sign or veto them. But to have inaction coming out of Congress and a discussion back and forth between the White House, I don't think solves the problem. We've got to get our job done.
You have a lot of agricultural workers in your district. Your district is about 45% Latino. What are you hearing from your constituents regarding DACA, and are they worried about maybe it's Dreamers today, tomorrow it'll be something else targeting agricultural workers?
Certainly there's concern about jobs and making sure that people in my district have jobs. That's a big part of our labor pool and a big part of the immigration crisis that we're seeing right now. But certainly, as you're talking about Dreamers, that's a different scenario. These are kids that were brought here to no fault of their own. We've never held kids accountable for laws that have been broken by their parents. We have to fix this Dreamer issue. We've got to do it quickly. Their government has asked them to step forward, to pass a background check, to pay a fee. And I think they feel very vulnerable right now because they have stepped forward. The president has given us 6 months to get this done. We need to get it done in the next several days to a couple of weeks, but it's got to get done immediately. Are you confident that it will get done? I am confident. I think that there is a renewed push from both parties to get this done. There is some pressure here, but we've got to move it quickly. And until a long-term fix for DACA happens, what would be your advice to DACA recipients right now? What should they be doing? I would say be vocal. I think that it's important that we make this a movement beyond California. It needs to be all 50 states coming together. And there are Dreamers across the country. There is immigration reform that's needed across the country, and I would expect every member to be engaged. But they need to hear from their constituents. We need to have people be vocal about this and be vocal about the expediency that's needed for a solution. All right, Congressman Jeff Denham of the Central Valley, thank you for joining us from the nation's capital this morning. Thank you for having me. Now we go to Sacramento for another perspective on DACA. California Attorney General Xavier Becerra plans to sue the Trump administration for ending the program. California has more DACA recipients than any other state. Scott Schaefer has that interview.
Attorney General Becerra, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Scott.
You're going to be filing a lawsuit probably next week against the Trump administration for phasing out DACA. Can you tell me what is the basis for this lawsuit going to be?
Well, every one of us in this country has grown accustomed to talking about our constitutional rights, whether it's due process, whether it's equal protection, whether making sure that the federal statutes that apply to everyone are enforced in the same way. We believe, and we believe we have a strong case to make, that those laws, those constitutional protections have not been enforced in an equal way, in a due process way, and certainly in violation of the procedures under the federal statutes.
Now, of course, New York and 14 states and the District of Columbia filed a lawsuit earlier this week. Will the legal basis for California's lawsuit be different?
Very similar. There will be some differences, but very similar. We've been working with those 16 attorneys general. We're working with several other AGs as well. We're working with some of our partners here in the state. You may have heard that the UC system has just filed a case as well, and we've been working with them. And so I think what you're finding is that this is going to be a battle that's fought on many fronts. But what we need to do is just make sure we're defending the dreamers.
Why not just join with the other states, or with UC for that matter? Is there a strategy, a legal strategy, of having so many different lines of attack, basically?
Well, you want to make sure, as I said, you have various lines of attack, so that way you can go after the enemy as best possible and come out victorious in battle. And in this case, I think what you're finding is that there are many ways that you can address these legal actions taken by the Trump administration. I believe that what you're going to find is that in these several actions that will be filed, there will be kernels that are very similar in all of them, but they all will take a slightly different approach. And remember that in California, we have the most dreamers who are affected by the president's action on DACA. In fact, we have more dreamers in California that are affected by DACA than all 16 of the jurisdictions that filed in New York earlier this week.
What would you say to critics who might say, well, you know, this Becerra guy, he just didn't want to share the spotlight with New York and these other states. He's going to be on the ballot next year, and this is just a way for him to get more attention. What would you say to those critics?
I do what I need to do to protect the people of California. I do what I believe is the best way to protect the people, and I'm going to do that. I have joined in some lawsuits. I have initiated some lawsuits. I will do whatever I think is necessary. I say that not just as the Attorney General. I say that as a son of immigrants. I know this issue well. I worked it for 24 years in Congress, and we're going to do everything we must to try to make sure that those DACA recipients, those dreamers who came forward, are paying taxes, went through background checks, are creating jobs, that they understand that in California, we believe they're helping build us, and we're creating more jobs, and we want to protect them.
We just heard Congressman Jeff Denham say that he supports DACA, and he'd like to see a resolution come from Congress. Do you think that ultimately, given that DACA was on somewhat shaky legal ground, that might ultimately be what's best for these DACA recipients?
Scott, first, yes, I do believe we have to move towards legislation at some point, but no, I disagree that DACA is on shaky legal ground. What DACA represents is what presidents from Eisenhower on forward have done in the past, and that is use their executive discretion to determine how best to enforce laws, and in this particular case, immigration laws. Talk to Ronald Reagan. Talk to George Bush Sr., who did the same thing, in fact, with greater numbers than what President Obama did with the DACA program. It is fully lawful. It's fully American in its values, and it's been wonderfully successful for so many people and for our states. So I believe the ultimate solution must come from Congress, because the DACA program is only temporary. A president cannot create new laws, but the president can determine how to enforce those laws, and that's what the Obama administration did. It gave us a roadmap on how to enforce immigration enforcement laws.
Just a few seconds left here. When do you think you're going to be filing that lawsuit, and where?
Soon, early next week. We'll probably be ready. We're trying to make sure that what we do is file what we believe will be the strongest case possible with the best information and evidence possible. We want to make sure that we get this right. And so we're going to file when we're ready, and we think we'll be ready by early next week.
All right. Attorney General Xavier Becerra, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Scott.
We turn now to a very personal take on DACA. 23-year-old Robert Nunez is like many of the hundreds of thousands of DACA beneficiaries in this country who have been able to work and study without fear of deportation. But he now faces the threat of being sent back to a country he barely knows. Nunez was 3 years old when he came to the U.S. from Mexico with his family. He grew up in Ventura County and graduated from UC Berkeley last December. Robert Nunez joins us now in the studio. Nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
What have the past few days been like as you absorbed Jeff Sessions' announcement about ending DACA?
Right. I think it's been a roller coaster, starting with a lot of anger, moving on to a lot of grief, and just trying to build hope in my community and organize with other fellow undocumented students. So a little bit of everything.
Are you currently working?
I am, yes.
What are you doing right now?
I work at a political consulting firm here in San Francisco. Just doing political communications and trying to advocate for progressive issues.
And does your employer know that you're undocumented?
Yes.
And knew it from the very start?
Yes.
And they're okay with that?
Right. We were very open about it. The firm does advocate for immigration clients. We do pro bono immigration work. So right off the bat, I felt like that was a place that I was very safe to share my story. And I felt very supported throughout the process.
What do you want to do career-wise?
Eventually, I want to get into immigration law. I want to be an attorney and hopefully work in government and politics in the future as well.
And what will happen to those plans if DACA doesn't stay in place?
Right. Well, there's so many scenarios that you kind of have to prepare for. Worst case scenario, probably have to start a new career in a new country, learn how to do my work in a completely new language.
Would that be are you saying would that be in Mexico, or you would go to some other country?
Mexico, sorry.
Okay.
Yes. Most likely just have to start over, see what I can do to further my education. It's all very uncertain, but I'm doing my best to try to take all of those scenarios into consideration and come up with plans for all of them.
Can you share with us the story of your family's journey to the U.S.? How did you get here?
Right. We came, I was 4 years old. There was situations in Mexico that were putting my family at risk, so my dad decided to move us here. We all came in different manners, but we all got here eventually.
When you say different manners, what do you mean? Did you split up?
Yes, we split up. My parents, they did take more dangerous routes to get here, and they put us in safer hands. And then we reunited when we got here. And my mom...
So your parents crossed the border on their own, and then
yes.
Who did you cross the border with? It was you and your younger brother?
Yes. We came with family members.
Okay, family members who were here already?
Yes.
Okay. Have you discussed this as a family, what all of you will do as a family if DACA is not renewed, you're deported?
I think the extent of our conversations were when Donald Trump got elected. That's when there was a real sense of urgency with me, and I got in contact with my parents and my brother, and I started trying to plan things. My mind automatically went to the worst case scenario. I think speaking with my mom and my father, they really brought me back to a level place, and they...
What did they tell you? Well,
my mom, definitely, she encouraged me to... She said the reason we came to this country was for you and your education, for you to succeed. She said if I get deported to Mexico, eventually, I'm going home. I get to see my mom. I get to see my siblings. For you, this is somewhere that you don't know. So it's definitely, she is more concerned about my situation. But just knowing that she was at ease with that has helped me cope a lot.
What do your parents do? Do they have jobs?
My mom is a stay-at-home mom. My dad, he's a mechanic. He actually recently opened his own mechanic shop down in Ventura County. And since then, he's hired several people, some of them natural-born citizens. So he's one of those immigrants who is here in the country contributing, creating jobs.
What is your biggest fear right now?
My biggest fear is always losing my mom. I think it's something you never outgrow. It's something that we grow up feeling, the fear of ending up in the United States without your parents, without that support, financial and just emotional. I think even still, that's my biggest fear. When I take into consideration being thrown out, I know wherever I'm present, there's going to be a way to thrive and there's going to be a way to overcome. But it's a lot more difficult trying to face that, knowing your parents are.
And just real quickly, are you hopeful right now? President Trump, reached across the aisle today, got a bipartisan deal regarding the debt ceiling. Do you think that bipartisanship might extend to DACA?
I'm not sure if the bipartisan will extend to DACA, but I do know that this gives us as dreamers a chance to organize in our communities and reach out to elected officials and put pressure on them. I think we're looking for these types of opportunities to make our voices heard and insert ourselves into conversations so that we can get Democrats and Republicans to put DACA into some kind of more permanent solution.
All right. Robert Nunez, thank you for coming in and sharing your story.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
The name Cesar Chavez is synonymous with farm worker rights, but Dolores Huerta, the woman who co-founded the United Farm Workers Union with Chavez, is less known. The new documentary, Dolores, aims to change that by highlighting the critical role Huerta played and continues to play as an activist and civil rights leader. Here's a clip from the film's trailer.
She's a civil rights hero.
She's the first general that I followed into war.
She's not afraid to speak truth to power.
Dolores Huerta, who's an old friend of mine.
The FBI knew how dangerous Dolores was. Dolores came up with the slogan, "Si se puede."
Yes, we can.
Scott Schaefer sat down with Dolores Huerta and film director Peter Bratt.
And joining me now are the producer and director of Dolores, Peter Bratt, and the subject of that film, Dolores Huerta. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Dolores Huerta, you got involved as an activist as a young woman. Tell us why you decided to make some hard decisions and get involved, to have this life as an activist.
Well, because I found out that as an organizer, that if you can get people to understand their own power, and if they organize and act collectively and take direct action, that they can actually make the changes that they need to make in their communities, and they can join in the political and civic life of our nation.
Well, let's watch a short clip from the film, Dolores, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
My mother was raised a Catholic and very traditional, and prior to going to New York City, she really didn't speak of feminism.
I was in New York when the feminist movement was being born, but my mind was focused on getting all of those women at those conventions to support the farm workers.
There was a time when rarely could you discover women of color who would identify as feminists, because it was assumed to be a question simply of gender. And if it was a question simply of gender, that gender was white.
One of the questions, of course, was why is it that everyone knows Cesar Chavez's name and Dolores Huerta not so much? Did you find in making this film that that was a deliberate omission?
It was funny because I spent about 9 months to a year researching her and the UFW, and some of the books, the seminal books, which some of them are like 3 inches thick, there would maybe be a few paragraphs about Dolores, and there's virtually no mention of her as a co-founder. So that started to become a very intriguing aspect in and of itself, and that eventually became part of the storyline.
But do you feel like it was, in fact, you know, why did it happen? Why was she left out? Why were those paragraphs so short?
I think it's complex. It has to do with her being a female, a woman of color, but I think it's more complex than that. I think Dolores challenges the 3 pillars of this society, which are patriarchy, white supremacy, and capitalism, and then that makes her very dangerous.
Dolores, you are the mother of 11 children, and you had to make some tough choices, which are discussed in the film, in terms of how do you balance being a mom and being an activist, and describe what some of those tough choices were with regard to your children.
Well, I think that those challenges many families in the movement and families today have to face those choices about, how can we get involved in civic life, and we know that we have so much work to do right now. We need people to be engaged at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, and so how do we balance that? Well, we have to do it by asking for help. And in the farm workers movement, we did have daycare for our children, so the kids were never alone. And otherwise, and also that they were in the marches with us, they were on the strikes with us, and so the kids really kind of grew up feeling the power of people working together for justice. And I think that was a great gift that my children had. I know they had to suffer my absences, but in addition, they had extraordinary experiences.
1975, Governor Jerry Brown, first time he was governor, signed the Agricultural Workers Labor Relations Act. And in some ways, that was a high water mark for the Farm Workers Union. It doesn't have nearly as many members now. What happened?
Well, I mean, the Agricultural Labor Relations Law is the strongest labor law in the country. And we, by the way, only we and Hawaii are the only 2 states that have that and have unemployment insurance for farm workers. And, the UFW, and I'm not going to speak for them because I don't work for them anymore, but they have a struggle because the employers are they're willing to put in thousands and thousands of dollars into attorneys and court cases to try to keep from signing the contracts.
President Trump made a decision this week to rescind DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, these young immigrants who were brought here illegally by their parents when they were kids. What's your reaction to that decision?
Well, that's in addition to pardoning Joe Arpaio, calling Mexicans criminals and rapists, accusing Judge Curiel, who happened to be Mexican-American, of some kind of favoritism. And I think it's just another indication of he has this rancor against Latinos, and especially in people of color. And I am concerned because, the fact that he's shooting that over to the Congress, and I am worried that they might try to make a devil's bargain and say, okay, DACA, if you DACA students can stay here but then we are going to build a wall, or we're going to do something else very oppressive against the Latino community.
And Peter, what would you add in terms of the DACA decision, what it says about where we are today in this country with regard to immigration and politics?
Right. I mean, they've been calling our community the sleeping giant for a long time, and to some degree they're right. You know, we're asleep. I really think with DACA now, and as Dolores mentioned, you know, the building of the wall, the pardon of Joe Arpaio, you know, the list goes on and on. We really need to wake up. We need to register voters, and we need to exercise our political will.
So Joe Arpaio, at the end of this month, is going to be the featured speaker in Fresno for a Republican Party fundraiser. What are your thoughts about bringing him into Fresno to be an attraction for donors?
Well, we have a line in the documentary Dolores, which is about my work with the Farm Workers Union, and where we say that Republicans hate Latinos, and it seems like they continue to you know, bent against us and use people like Joe Arpaio as the models for their party, which I think is a very bad model for the Republican Party. And we just want to remind them what happened when they had Proposition 187, and they took away bilingual education with Proposition 227, and took away our affirmative action with 209. And in California, we have a blue state, and all of that legislation that they passed is responsible for that. And I think the same thing will happen to the Central Valley of California.
I think in today's political climate, a lot of people feel very discouraged and down, and feel like their participation in the political process is ineffectual. So I hope people see this film and see by Dolores' example and work that you're never out of the game, but we need to get civically engaged. We need to go down to the voting booth and vote.
All right, we'll leave it right there. And the film is called Dolores. It premieres this weekend in the Bay Area. Peter Brad, director and producer. Dolores Huerta, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
And if you don't get a chance to see Dolores in theaters this weekend, the documentary is coming to PBS in 2018. And that will do it for us. You can find more of our coverage at kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Thank you for joining us.